What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, talking about 14.13. Started a little bit there, whatever, it's fine. Yeah, the patch has been locked as of about 24 hours ago. We can technically still make changes, but we're almost certainly not going to. Let's talk about patch 14.13 coming out in about 1 week's time. Quick preamble. Actually, one thing that's not written here is I enjoyed not spending the extra couple hours doing the patch rundown last week. I didn't feel like there's anything I needed to say. That said, I'll probably still do one-off videos once in a while around random topics. Some of these are going to be just handled the preambles here. Maybe they're supposed to be their own thing. I don't know, but whatever. For now, this is how it's being done. So one thing that I mentioned in, I think, the last preview, the one before, was wanting to do some things to assassins. So for those who didn't see what I said or hear what I said or whatever, I wanted to adjust some assassins to be better as lane bullies, as long as the actual gameplay is there for being good laners and there's actually some back and forth. I think it's viable to, for any assassin who has gameplay to their pattern at all, skew them toward being more lethal against their initial lane opponent, and so that a larger portion of their power budget is to go dominate lane. I think broadly, in general, that is something that we should do in live design on League of Legends. I think that is worth doing in the parts that make sense. Not that every assassin should be a lane bully, but that, broadly speaking, we should make that more true. I still believe in that. I think that's true. The difficulty is that time is limited, not only on the design side, so my time, for example, but testing resources are also limited. Yeah, so for example, Aurora is coming out really soon, and Aurora is a solo laner, and you generally don't want to test a test point versus a test point because you need a control to test point against. And so if, for example, we're testing Aurora in mid, there's no reason to test Akali at the same time because your Aurora read's going to be off if Akali's balance state is wrong. And Akali's read's going to be off because who the hell knows how strong Aurora is, like, realistically, compared to the rest of the roster, right? And so it's like, well, that's not possible. Or if Aurora's in the top lane and, like, Akali used to be a pretty popular top lane. I actually looked back at her pro history, and about a third of all Akali plays, or a quarter of all Akali plays in pro play, are in top lane. And so if you look at, like, solo queue pick rate, it's close to, like, 1/4, but there's some value here, right? So and again, if Aurora's there, you can't do it. And by the way, there's other champions development, and right at varying levels of readiness, right? So they're going to be played more or less based on that, right? And that existing means that testing resources are limited, and so we can't always do this. So like, for what it's worth, there are some Akali tests or changes in flight. We've gotten a few playtests on them. I've got more iterations to go, but they're living in, like, future for a while until we can get enough playtesting time such that we can do that. And hey, Aurora ships relatively soon. That's going to free up some slots in our solo lanes. That's good, but, like, again, can't guarantee a ship date here. That's one of the downsides of saying, hey, here's something I think we should do, here's something that's valuable, is that people then immediately create an expectation that's going to happen, and that might not happen right away. And maybe that means I shouldn't be telling you about things that I think are going to be useful down the line, because now it's required that I prioritize it and it gets done in a timely fashion, and I don't know the right balance between things that I think would be good for the game and setting expectations improperly, because maybe I come up with a reason, or there's a good reason I'm convinced of, that isn't actually this isn't worth doing anymore, or just realities happen and it can't be done yet. So all those are things. Anyway, yeah, there are some assassin stuff in flight, but also there are some changes to some keystone runes, with the expectation of at least slightly reshaping assassin power curves towards being more lane dominant. I also want to take a little more time talking about recommended runes, recommended items. So one experiment was done before I joined the team, which was around, I think it was Hecarim, Jax, and Lilia. And their recommended items were updated. And basically they deleted like Zonia second from Lilia, and they deleted Divine Sunderer first off of Jax and Hecarim. And this essentially meant that people would, like, go Trinity Force instead, or they'd, like, go Leandries or whatever on Lilia instead, because it's not there in the recommended items. And it had a very negligible impact in win rate, even though data indicated that Trinity Force first or Leandry second were, like, far higher win rate options than Divine Sunderer. And when it happened, when you change something from being a recommended item to not being a recommended item, is that the win rates would flip, because any item that is recommended, especially if it's the most common recommended item, it's the one on the far right of the shop. That's the default purchase for newbies at a champion, and they will tend to not like make sophisticated choices. And then anything if not that gets increasingly more win rate by being not a recommended item. And so it went from Triforce being the higher win rate item to Center being the higher win rate item, just via the fact, that like the shop wasn't thrusting it in front of you anymore. And the same thing happened for Zonius here, Lilia, and the end result was a very little win rate gain for the champions. Now, I wanted to keep doing that experiment because I saw the results. Right, there's like a slide deck, like with like 2-3 slides, like here's what happened, here are the results, like not a lot of deep dive, but just like, hey, by the way, this is an observed phenomenon, don't get too crazy about this. So I wanted to do this again, but with recommended runes. And so I did this with Cassante a few patches ago. I did it with around 7 champions last patch. I'm doing it to 4 more champions this patch. And what I've observed so far is, to put a number to it, is that it's roughly 2%. If you see an underpicked rune that is specifically not a rec rune, that's an important asterisk. If it's not a rec rune, and the winner difference is under 2%, it's probably not actually better. Probably. Now, what's interesting is that this phenomenon appears to be true whether the champion is difficult or easy. So I did this for Cassante, for example. And I moved Cassante over to Shield Bash in Resolve because he has a very good reason to use Shield Bash. It's clearly good on him, and I moved him off Demolish onto Shield Bash because Shield Bash's win rate was like 2.5 or 3% higher win rate. Roughly, I could look it up to be sure, but like, whatever. I'll do it for a video with like the actual deep dives and the actual numbers, but like my recollection is that it was like over 2% win rate higher, and I switched it. And we got to a state where Demolish was under 2% win rate higher, meaning that the win rate delta of I choose to switch off the rec rune to the opt-in rune was lower than before, aka the new rune is actually stronger, and players who opt in are maybe griefing themselves or only opting in situations where it really makes sense or whatever. But ultimately, anytime you see a lower win rate delta, once you change a recommendation, probably means the recommendation change was correct. Broadly speaking, there can be other reasons going on here, but generally speaking, it's going to be true. And so I applied this to a bunch of other champions. I made sure Gangplank had a grasp page. I moved around a bunch of runes on the block, moved around a bunch of runes on Talon, did it to Seraphine, did it to Karma, and in almost all these cases saw a measurable win rate gain for the champions. The most notable of this was LeBlanc gained a full 1% win rate off of like a lot of recommended rune changes. Now, there's a very strong bias here in that it was the same patch that LeBlanc got a new skin, and so her pick rate jumped up by a ton. Now, you would expect, generally speaking, that a new skin means that potentially unexperienced players are playing here, but it might have been that, like, oh, a bunch of old LeBlanc mains came back and played this champion, which is why you have to do it to a lot of champions, because if LeBlanc was our only test point here, then you'd have a very strong and obvious bias here, which makes your numbers pretty fraught. But comparing it to everyone else whose stuff I changed, like, actually, no, most of the win rate gain was probably real and from rec rune changes. And so there's actually seems to be relatively fertile ground, no matter if your champion is easy or hard, because, again, I mentioned Karma and Seraphine, who are much easier champions than Cassante, had a pretty similarly measured impact in terms of, oh yeah, when you change the rec runes, here's the win rate lift you expect to see, and the new comparisons, like, it just ends up being about 2%, regardless of champion difficulty, which I find very odd, but appears to be true. Anyway, all this to say that we can pretty easily gain between like 0.2 and 1% win rate off of rec rune changes if there's enough runes that have room for optimization. And so usually at the end of a sprint, if all my stuff is done and I've got a couple of, I've got like 6 hours, sort of free, where I'm not in meetings or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go and dive through a bunch of champions and see if there's a bunch of like, oh, mains have discovered this really cool rune optimization, but, the general masses haven't yet. Oh, well, I can just make this the recommended rune choice so that, especially if a champion's suffering in win rate, oh, cool, I can just like invite everybody else. One other thing I want to bring up here, this is actually now more sort of the content itself, because we're doing rec rune changes in this patch, is I'm trying to bias toward having more unique pages. There are several champions where like, oh, rune page A is these 8 runes, and rune page B is these 8 runes, except that like only the keystone's different, or like only this row 3 precision rune is different, and it's like, well, that's not very exciting. And so what I'll try to do is, if it's competitive, if there's clearly an option that is as good, I won't give you a downgraded page. I won't give you an obviously downgraded page. But if it's like, oh, actually, this like Trundle has 3 competitive rune options. So there's a Trundle page, for example, or I'm changing press the attack plus inspiration, because press the attack plus resolve is higher win rate, and turning that into grasp plus precision, so that now there is a conqueror page, which isn't great, but it's still there. There's a press the attack page, which the better one is resolve anyway. I'm keeping that one intact. And there's now a grasp page, because grasp appears to be very, very good. And of course, only Trundle players who are managing the page are doing this, because it's not a rec page. But hey, it's there and it's good. We should make it a rec page because it is good. And it's like, yes, Trundle actually has 3 viable keystones. And again, PT is probably always better than Conqueror, but like has 3 viable keystones. Oh, cool. That's like a little bit of extra niceness, a little bit of extra spice, because there are in fact multiple viable keystones, and that's useful to give, and that's useful to have, and useful to present. And so we can get some kind of meaningful gains doing that, right? Okay. So moving down, let's talk about how last patch went overall. So first things first, it looks like Karma is fine now. So Karma is roughly a 50% win rate support. Like with Meta Enchanters, she has room for gaining win rate by optimizing skill order and optimizing item builds. But that's normal. Like a lot of champions have this, so not a big concern here. But Karma is about a 50% win rate support. Now, Karma is harder than most other enchanters. Her kit is less straightforward, so about 50 is probably appropriate. And she's at 50 without a huge surge in ban rate. It's probably going to increase a little bit over time because she's actually pretty good, and she's a lane bully, and so people tend to ban lane bullies. Lux has a high ban rate as well, for example. But Karma is finally fine. We gave a bunch of big buffs to E, and we'll see. LCS was on point 12 last weekend, and they weren't rushing to pick Karma a whole bunch, and so Karma might finally be saved. Congratulations. I think we had various design wins over time around, because ulti haste exists, having to tune down the ulti refreshes and giving Q a real mana cost and untying R plus E from E's ranks so that you can, like all these things are relevant, and I think we're like an incrementally better design champion, but also Karma is finally appropriately powerful, which is great. Speaking of appropriately powerful, Corki seems to have a pretty bad win rate. I would have to go look tomorrow and dig in on master data to see if new Corki is actually difficult. Old Corki actually had a pretty high mastery curve, and so a low win rate for Corki. Also, Corki had no mains at all. No one's a Corki one trick. And so old Corki was like correctly had a very low win rate. I'd have to look. I know we have the numbers. I would have to look if Corki's new curve is relatively easy, if he's like normal for a marksman. I'd have to go check, so I don't know for sure. But as it stands, his win rates kind of suck. That said, he still gets plenty of pro play. Some of this is probably that AD carry items are good, and so pros are playing a lot of AD mids, and so Corki is one of 3 really good AD mids, the other 2 being Tristana and Ezreal. Jace is kind of like clearly 4th place here at this point. But the other could be that AP junglers are very good. And so because AP junglers are good, and you don't want to have 2 or 3 AP in your team, and your support is almost always kind of, by Merc Treads, it's very hard to want to run magic damage jungle, magic damage mid, enchanter, or Merc Treads countered support, right? If it's Nami or it's Nautilus, Merc Treads still matters there, and then you only have AD from top, and if your AD damage from top is only Cassante, it's just not enough really, and you really don't want to be that magic damage heavy, right? So, there's factors also where it's like, well, if mage junglers are good, are going to play a lot of AD mids, and that is true, of course. Like Nidalee, for example, unaffected entirely by Runic Ashes, most common jungle pick right now in pro play, right? Unaffected by Runic Ashes, Nidalee's number 1 right now. So, right, it's a bit of both, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, all this to say, Corki's win rate doesn't seem very good in mid or in bot. That said, this could easily be explained by mastery curve, and it's actually not a problem, and this is appropriate for him. Certainly he's getting a lot of pro play right now. So even though his win rate is low, this might be fine. He is kind of a new champion after all. The biggest win of the patch, in my opinion, though, was Aatrox. Both in terms of he had a big surge in pick rate, which is always nice to see. He did not gain any win rate. It's actually down a little bit. But so the thing is, it's easy to say like, a surge in pick rate means they should go down to win rate because bad players are playing them. But my experience has been that unless you are like one of the most extremely hard champs of the game, like maybe Azir or something, that doesn't tend to be that strong of a actual impact. That people who've never played a champion don't suddenly start playing this champion just because they got a buff. It tends to be more neutral in that regard. So Aatrox got a small-ish pick rate increase, which is cool. Got a banner increase. Okay, fine, whatever. Win rate did not meaningfully go up. However, it appears that Divine Sunder is a higher win rate build, which is great. And also from sort of just like reading social media comments, but also like player survey responses across the world, right? English speaking regions, China, etc. People are like, hell yeah, dude, best unit of the patch is Aatrox, which is like awesome. I'm so glad. People don't really want to play lethality Aatrox. I know they're like the most common build right now is Eclipse, but like it's going towards Divine Sunder into Cleaver or Shojin into Sterix or the other of Cleaver, Shojin or whatever. Great, really cool stuff. His win rates are reasonable. 49.x is about right for Aatrox. He's more hard than average, so expected here. All cool stuff. Generally speaking, though, as far as like live balance changes, win rates gained and lost, pretty much all hits. We're in pretty much the right win rates for all these champions now. I think Akshan is probably still a little bit overpowered. He is a high mastery champion. I would have to check his like relative share of mains, but he's probably supposed to be sub 50 for most players. He's currently not, so that's scary. But generally speaking, when you're unpopular enough, and Akshan's just kind of not that popular of a champion, it tends to not have to matter that much. Again, he might be technically OP, but you can make the argument for having variation in champ selects is more valuable, and he's okay. He's allowed to be like a little bit overpowered, and that's okay, kind of long term. So, generally speaking, all hits right directionally pretty good, and most win rates are kind of where we want them for the champions that we changed. Alrighty, on to the systems changes for this patch itself. Of course, 50 minutes in, haven't talked about the patch itself yet, but let's go talk about it now. First things first are some changes to what are nominally assassin runes. So Electrocute and Dark Harvest are getting changes. I want to make them just because I like when things are incrementally better designed than they were before. Again, some of this was like, I rescripted Karma R plus E to care only about R rank so that you didn't have to care about your E rank to do your other stuff, because that's how the rest of our spells worked. R plus W just adds flat root duration no matter what. R plus E now adds flat shield no matter what, and like the other stuff, like the other inputs don't care about the actual rank of Q or the rank of W, right? Like the gains don't care about that. So cool, that was a good change. Anyway, doing this for Electrocute and Dark Harvest because I want to sharpen the point of runes. My current thinking on runes, this is not like I have a full like dissertation ready, but the way I'm viewing runes right now is that they should be a way for players to be expressive, without breaking what we think should be fundamental rules of the game. So, for example, Electrocute and Dark Harvest are both in Domination, so they don't change any of your other rune choices, they don't have to, but you can express that you want to be early game dominant, or that you think you don't need your rune to be early game dominant, right? Dark Harvest does nothing until you get your champion below half HP without any help from your keystone, and Electrocute by itself says, well, this is going to deal damage for you as long as you can play the combat pattern out yourself, right? Just perform the actions, get a reward, versus have enough throughput, now you actually have a keystone. And so these are pretty different, both in input, but also in output. Of course, the output is still just damage, but like the fact that this one ramps up over stat count, whatnot, obviously is better. So anyway, I wanted to sharpen the use cases. So for Electrocute, I wanted to sharpen Electrocute as very clearly, this is the early game assassin rune choice. And so there's a cooldown buff, levels 1 through 17. It's now flat 20 instead of 25 to 20 based on champ level. And I buffed the early game damage to 50 instead of 30, but the late game damage is down from like 220 to 190 or something like that. I forget the exact numbers, but it's plus 20 early, minus 30 late, but the cooldown is buffed 1 through 17, so it's like clearly much better early game. And the point is to say Electrocute is there for domination users, aka you're probably an assassin, to have extra lane dominance. The point of Electrocute is to make this expression and say, I am going to be lane dominant, I'm going to dominate you in lane, and I'm going to use this keystone in order to help me do this. And so this actually makes all assassins somewhat more lane dominant, right? It does it systemically in a way that I think we're comfortable with. I think 50 damage is totally reasonable for a keystone to deal. You think about what press the attack does, and it's not that far apart. The trigger condition is a bit harder, but whatever. I think these numbers are, I don't think this could go to 100, right? I think it would be like way too high. We couldn't do that at rank 1 or anything, but 50 I think is passable. Keep in mind the AP and AD ratios are very, very low. In fact, they used to be higher, so the level 1 of this rune used to be higher just back in the day, just from, you know, Doran's Blade and 2 stat shards, but regardless, can go up somewhat. And again, lower cooldown says you can repeatedly use this and say, this is going to be part of your combat pattern, actively use Electrocute, actively go fight people, go get some stuff. Go get stuff done, right? Dark Harvest, the level scaling has been cut entirely from the rune. The level scaling no longer exists. It's a flat 20, but the per stack damage, it goes from 5 to now 9. One weird difficulty that I've seen players constantly have a problem with online is players always assume the level 18 value, but level 18 is fake in League of Legends. The average solo queue game goes to about 28 minutes, which is roughly level 15. Higher elo games go much shorter. If you pretend you're high elo and use level 18 for anything, you're telling on yourself, because you're not. Level 18 is incredibly fake in Masters Plus. Like Masters Plus games go like 24 minutes. Like level 14 is fake in Masters Plus in a lot of cases. At least, I mean, for solo laners it's probably pretty reasonable, but like Level 18 is like clearly fake, even in low elo solo queue. One other thing to point out, by the way, is that this is something else. This is like more tangential, but I saw someone else talk about stuff, which is like someone said something to the effect of like they were talking about lethality changes. So I guess it's more about opportunity here. So I'll highlight this for a second. But they were like, yeah, dude, solo queue games go too long for lethality builds on 80 carries to be good. And it's like, you can trivially look this up yourself. Pro games go longer than solo queue games. Like, full stop. This is just true. Level 18 is actually not fake in pro play and is fake in solo queue. Like, the average pro game is like 31 minutes. The average solo queue game is 28 minutes. Even low elo solo queue games like 29 minutes. So the average pro game goes longer than the average bronze game. And then the average pro game is like 8 minutes longer than the average masters game. It's like really not close, and it's always longer in pro. So any level scaling is actually a much bigger thing in pro. Anyway, whatever. Talk about Dark Harvest. Yes, if you were somehow level 18 with Dark Harvest, the break even would be like getting 1 stack per level. Okay, great. Congratulations. Anyway, the point is that Dark Harvest is meant to be riskier, right? The point of Dark Harvest is say, hey, this is meant to be a riskier option that says that you know how to farm your lane opponent, that you can bring them down to half without any help at all. And you're going to opt into taking a risky rune. And in some cases, rune is going to absolutely frag and you're going to get like 30 stacks and you're going to be amazing. Congratulations. Good for you. You're good at using Dark Harvest. You had a great game. You made the shot call that you could dominate your lane opponent. Sick. Having runes that are more situational is probably better because, right, this is actually why, part of why I changed the flat armor MR stat shards to flat health scaling health is like, I'm fine with you failing a rune test if the choice was like difficult, where it's like, can I dominate my lane opponent? Yes, no. And then you can't, and you went Dark Harvest and you failed. That's on you. You made a choice. You made an interesting choice that was making a shot that you could dominate your lane opponent. Asking if Yone or Akali is going to be top or mid is just like, did you flip a coin correctly? You don't have 8 MR against Akali. Have fun losing, right? That's not the same thing. Yes, obviously you can say that, well, if I'm against Akali, I can dominate my lane. If I'm against Yone, I can't. Like, I understand that that can still exist to a certain degree when flex picks exist in solo queue, but it's not the same as literally pass-fail versus I think I'm better than my opponent, right? And so I find this kind of choice to be very interesting and very cool, and I'm a very big fan of this. And so the more we can have, like, intention behind a rune, I think the better designed runes are. Now, I'm not saying that every rune is now perfect, but I think there are incremental gains in runes via having done this. Anyway, final systems change is a nerf / buff to opportunity. So we're actually buffing the unique passive move speed on takedown from 150 decaying to 200 decaying. The other one is actually making opportunity ranged modded. So the lethality given from the buff when you are ranged is only 60% as effective. Now, what's cool is we had, this was actually something that got added, I think, for 14.1. It's one of the nice things about having engineers fully attached to Summoner's Rift team, that this came out of the seasonal pod, but still engineers for Summoner's Rift team, was to say, hey, what we want is a, how am I trying to describe this? We would like a better systemic, like, usable system for melee ranged modding items. Basically, it used to be really crappy and a really horrible system and really annoying to handle. What's great here is it's super free. So basically, Opportunity has a calculation, right? It has a calculation that says, hey, how much lethality is given to me, and it's 5 plus 0.5 per level. With the level scaling starting after level 7. So it, at level 1, it's 5. And then starting at level 8, it gives plus 0.5 per level with no end date, which means that it gives 5 to 10.5 based on what level you are up to level 18. And you can say, and that's just called like a game calculation or whatever, right? And it's like, set a breakpoint, set a second breakpoint, set how the breakpoint's going to scale. Okay, congratulations. And I can say, okay, well, I'm gonna click this drop down box as a calculation, say, I want to be a calculation that is melee range mod. And it's just like the third option down the list. And I go, and it's like, okay, well, there's a new box. And it's like, what's the range mod? What's the modifier for being ranged? And I go, I want this range mod to be a named data value, or it could be a number or whatever. But I'm like, I want it to be a named data value. And then I go make a data value and I say, this data value is called ranged mod and it's 0.6. And then I say, this drop down, the named data value is going to be ranged mod. And it's like, all right, done. There's no localization changes. I don't have to rescript the item. I don't have to do anything. I go into like the JSON little handler file and I say, okay, change this dropdown, write in a variable, address it. Done. I made a range mod. It was not this easy a year ago. And so I'm like so happy that we have engineers who can like make our tools better, because this is trivially easy now, where, you know, on day 2 of the job I could have done this no problem, which is great, which is awesome, right? It's cool to like learn the tools, have the tools get better and whatnot. And then of course buffing the move speed was changed, number 150 to 200 under the hood, but cool stuff there. So Opportunity, basically the reason we're doing this, by the way, is Opportunity is basically it has Kha'Zix and then a bunch of ranged champions as users, but it's basically not using any melee assassins, which means that like it's not good enough for melee users, and so it's just getting flat MS. Congratulations, Opportunity is good for getting out after a kill. That's what you need. It's better at that. We're going to play up that unique benefit that this item provides. Congratulations. Is it going to do a ton? Maybe not a ton, but whatever. But it's also clearly eating all the pick rate for ranged users. It is clearly the best caster item for AD casters. It's beating Eclipse, it's beating Youmu's, it's beating Umbral Glaive, it's beating all these things, and so item is just overpowered, and so we should nerf it. And so we're nerfing it by, you know, 2 to 4 or whatever lethality at the start of a fight for ranged users. Okay, cool. Moving on. Varus is getting a very large patchwork. Now, if you've been following PvE changes, this has been there have been several updates over the course of time. I think we're on like the 5th iteration or so that's gone to PvE. So Varus to me has 2 problems. So actually a bit of history lesson. About 4 months ago, Varus had about an 8% pick rate, which was 4% lethality and 4% on hit. Varus now has about a 6% pick rate, which is 4% lethality, 2% on hit. I'm averaging, but like it's roughly true. That basically lethality Varus is as popular as he was at the start of the year, and on hit Varus has lost half his pick rate. Now I assume a lot of this is the dissatisfaction of how non-functional that build feels with lethal tempo. Now the funny thing is, the power of that build has not actually gone down. It's not actually weaker to play on hit Varus than it used to be. Like truly, it's actually not. I can look at the win rates of like Blade King for a slot, and it's not really that different. But it feels like ass to have your passive no longer exist late game. Also, Varus is one of the easier marksmen to play. One of the easier ADCs to play, which means his win rates shouldn't be like 48%, while arguably the best ADC in pro play. Like, Zeri at 49 could pretty easily, I could be convinced, be the best ADC in the game. Jinx at 52.5, I could be convinced is the best ADC in the game. Like, that's all very reasonable. I can see that being true, and so those being like the #1 champions at first points in time. Yeah, I can see that, right? Varus at 48, while also being the best pro play champion, something is wrong here, right? Like there's a disconnect between performance in solo queue and performance in pro play. And so, hey, I don't want Varus to be bad for solo queue because he shouldn't be 48. Like what I know about how hard he is and his relative share of mains, like this champ shouldn't be 48. But not only do people not feel like they can play on hit Varus because they overcap their attack speed, but also it just isn't performing very well. And so it did a lot of changes here with those twin goals, basically, of like, can we lower pro presence because variety is good? Can we raise solo queue power level because he's actually just weak for the vast majority of League of Legends players? And can we make on-hit build feel better because his player base left because it feels like ass to not have a passive? Like all these things are true, right? And so can I fix all 3 of these things? And so hopefully that has happened here. So the biggest thing is a very large adjustment to his passive. So Varus passive, as it stands, so how much detail I want to give here? Basically, TLDR is instead of the passive giving attack speed and then more attack speed based on your bonus attack speed, it gives attack speed and then gives attack damage ability power based on your bonus attack speed. Which means that like if you are stacking a bunch of AS, the total amount that this gives on AS will not go any higher. It will just simply give you a dagger or 4 daggers and that's it. But instead, if you're playing high AS Varus, what it's going to give you are stats that synergize with AS. AP buffs every output of your W, and AD buffs every output of your auto attacks Q and E. Which means these are both stats that he cares about. They're not meme stats. He has very real AP ratios. AP Varus is a bit weaker than AD Varus, but not non-viable. So like, you know, building pure AP on this champion is actually a very real build, which means the stat is very real. And AD, of course, is a very real stat. You know, of course. And ideally, what I would like is that Varus is a Spellweaver. A little bit Ezreal-like, a little bit Smolder-like, a little bit Misfortune-like, where both autos and spells matter. Smolder's obviously way more spellcastery, don't get me wrong, but like both autos and spells matter would be the ideal here, right? I think actually probably Xayah is a closer example here where like she clearly cares about every button press and clearly cares about right clicking. Like ideally that is a pretty good multi. I think Xayah is a really well designed champion. And so ideally he is in that spot where like his spells matter and whatnot here, okay? And so that's why I'm giving you AD and AP with attack speed. Attack speed natively scales the WQ, WE loop, all those things. Okay, great stuff. Now, one thing to point out here actually is the calculation of the passive was actually, I will say bugged. It's bugged in air quotes. So the way Varus passive works on live today right now is it says, actually it might not say in the tooltip, but it essentially says it only counts bonus attack speed from items and runes and other sources. What actually happens is it goes into the scripting of the passive and says, okay, that's cute, get this calculation. Subtract 3% attack speed per level, but keep in mind, Varus' attack speed per level is 4%. So Varus actually gains 1% AS growth that goes into the passive, and then items and runes and everything else also feed into it, which means that, yes, lethality Varus was like technically getting a little bit more than the 10, 15, 20, and 40% from the passive. He was getting, you know, a fraction of whatever he's getting elsewhere. But because that number was hard-coded in the scripting of the ability and not, you know, referencing his base stats, that can degrade over time. I'm just making the passive, you just get it from your stats. Congratulations. Like if you're level 18 Varus with pure lethality and no stat shows, no nothing, you're still going to get 10% AS, and then like, you know, the like 43% attack speed whatever you get from stat growth, you're going to get like 4.3 attack damage ability power. You're just going to get some stuff. Like if you're playing lethality Varus, it's literally a better passive than before because you're getting roughly the same flat value and you're just getting a way better scaling value. Just straight up, it's just actually better. So that's a pretty big deal. And so this is a strict buff to lethality Varus because especially the passive now actually scales for him. Obviously I know like the minion thing had a level scaler, but whatever. For attack speed Varus, the point is that this output shouldn't go to waste. The other thing that I did is actually create an attack speed override during the champion portion of the R, such that the 40% bonus AS from the champion passive will actually increase your bonus attack speed, your total attack speed cap by 40% of his AS ratio. Now that, to be fair, much like the old passive, is also hard-coded functionally, which means you will very easily get into a spot where if we ever change Varus' AS ratio and no one goes into the passive and change the number from like 0.243 or whatever to some other number, it'll you know, not give him the right attack speed cap. Thankfully, it's a pretty easy change. It's just inside the passive, and it's like a, you know, very clearly named data value, and so it's not that hard to update. It would be trivial if you knew to look for it, and it's there. But hey, by the way, yeah, technically it's going to exist, and there's, you know, totally a chance that, you know, we have an oversight and it screws up here, right? That's a possibility here. Okay, anyway, moving on. Hopefully, the point is this passive still feels good. He feels faster, and it's more effective for on-hit Varus, and it actually will be a lot more effective for a lethality as well. The last thing I want to bring up is hopefully the champion passive is very, very strong. My supposition here, and I believe this is pretty true, actually I know it's true from data, but I believe it's true in terms of like actual like expressed power, that champion takedown passives are solo queue skewed. So Jinx passive, Varus passive, whatever. My understanding is that someone actually told me this directly, a designer who was around at the time, that Varus champion passive exists in order to give him the ability to clean up fights, because that is something that was considered very valuable for marksman back when he was made in 2010 or whatever. And so intentionally kept that quite strong. To be clear, I actually kept the champion passive quite strong. And I believe that the champion passive is very strong and is very performant. That will help to solo queue skew him, because I actually know for a fact kills and assists per minute are much higher in solo queue than pro play. So anything that triggers on kill and assist should just be more effective in solo queue than pro play. And so juicing Varus passive should theoretically be a solo queue, heavily solo queue skewed lever, because it's like 2 to 3x, you know, kills and assists per minute, right? Anyway, other small changes, because I believe this truly is a strict buff and more of a buff for solo queue. -3 base AD. Keep in mind that as soon as you learn W, you get 7 free on hit damage. So the base AD is low, but that's entirely fake, because you know, much like Kaisa or Misfortune passive or anything else, like this champ has more on hit damage for real, and we could be like, yeah, dude, your trading is bad until you learn W. Okay, right? Like, that's fine, and then it's immediately better, right? Also, because Q is a total AD ratio, this actually takes some damage off Q as well. So we're not only nerfing base AD, we're also nerfing AS growth some. I'm actually on somewhat of a mission to try to strip a lot of free AS off of on-hit champions, because we get to a state pretty quickly where these on-hit champions just overcap their attack speed really quickly. So Kog'Maw has like average AS growth, but gets like 30 or 35% free AS from his Q passive. That's a ton. That's another 2 to 3 AS growth based on level, which means he just has like Azir levels of AS growth. Like Azir can't buy more than 1 attack speed item. And so Azir having really, really high AS growth is like, yeah, because you can't do anything else here, but you need to feel like you're getting faster. So you have the highest AS growth in the game. Congratulations. And then you have champions like Kaisa or Xayah or whatever. Like they have the steroid, and they press the steroid, but also they don't buy 5 attack speed items, right? They buy a bunch of AD items and their steroid is on, and they're like, oh, congratulations. I'm like, yeah, sure, Kaisa, I think right now is doing some like Nashor's Tooth Rageblade stuff. And so like she's buying like 2.5 to 3, but like again, she's not buying 4. Whereas like on hit Varus is buying 4, right? It's Bork or Kraken, and it's Rageblade, and it's what's it called? Terminus, and then maybe a Wit's End. Then it's like, well, you're going to overcap. And so the more free AS Varus has, the quicker his items overcap him. And to me, a decent baseline, as kind of in my head, is like, you should be able to buy 4 AS items with like your expected rune page and not overcap. Now, I'm not saying we're hitting that in all cases here, but it's why I'm nerfing Varus' attack speed growth from 4% to 3.5%. It's still high, by the way, but it's to make some room for him to be able to buy 4 items and feel actually good about it, and then say, yeah, item 5 is allowed to be GA or Ma or Shield Bow or whatever. It's fine. You don't need to buy 5 AS items. You shouldn't need to. You probably shouldn't even want to, in the way that you buy 4 crit items and you're done. You literally overcap on crit and it does nothing. Here, go buy 4 AS items and then stop. I think those are both pretty reasonable stances. Obviously, it's very explicit in crit, where you're like, I hit 100, then I stop. Of course I stop. It's less obvious in AS, and that means we have to like pretty manually tune stuff on our side. But I think it's a very defensible sort of place and a sort of direction that we can go for. So the reason for the nerf there. And then some changes to W plus Q. So this is the odd hit damage on W goes up by 1 per rank. This is the missing health damage of pressing W during your Q channel is getting changed from a level scaler to a rank scaler. One thing I've noticed is that even lethality Varus players mostly max W second, and it's very clearly wrong. It's like 2 to 3% win rate lower than E max second. Part of why his win rate is lower than actuality is because pros are skilling correctly, and your average solo queue Varus is not skilling correctly, even when playing lethality. Even though this ability is clearly a physical damage spell, there's still maxing W. And so it's like, well, let's at least close the gap, right? Like, there's no reason why we can't just say that W matters here and make the win rates a little bit closer together. And also, it's a pretty free way to nerf pro win rate without nerfing solo queue win rate. Hey, it's free low, right? And so, yeah, it's still going to be the same thing at level 2 and 3 and the same thing at level 13. But that middle point, even if you are maxing W second, is going to be a direct nerf. It's literally going to be weaker, right? So WQ is going to be literally weaker. Your base is going to be literally weaker. Your rest is going to be better, right? And of course, nerfing opportunity. So like lethality Varus probably is on whole weaker as a champion. Like, don't get me wrong, it's going to be a nerf, but not by a huge degree. Anyway, the other thing is there's 2 more things. So one, the cooldown refund by popping a blight stack is going from 12% per stack to 13% per stack. That sounds really small, but keep in mind that you can pop 3 per time, so it's going from 36 to 39. And your Q empowers blight effects by up to 50% based on charge time. So it goes from 36 times 1.5 to 39 times 1.5, which means instead of being a 3% CD difference, it's a 4.5% CD difference. It gets to the point where essentially any 6 blight stack pop of, E and full channel Q will always refund every single basic cooldown, which means you can always chain everything together as long as you have enough attack speed to get 3 blight stacks, press E, get 3 blight stacks, full channel Q. And it will always, with no exceptions, if you can always get 6 stacks of full charge Q, will always bring all your spells back, including your W active, by the way, which means you can always cast it every single spell here, right? And so it's high enough where no matter what you're getting going on, you can always chain. Congratulations. And it also means that you don't have to quite full channel Q as often because, going to like only 90% by not full channeling Q, you'll still kind of get there, right? That's the point of these changes here is to let you always cycle. When it was higher than 13%, you just didn't have to care anymore, and you could like pop 1 or 2 blight stacks and then get everything back, and it was just like, it was too spammy actually going for the 3 autos. And that's the thing, right, is like by making blight stacks matter, we can make attack speed matter in high AD builds. And it's like trying to get this entire kit to work that little bit better together. That's the hope here. That's kind of what's going on. That's kind of the point, and I'll thought process behind these changes. All right, more changes. Champion nerfs. So Brand was given a mana restore on his passive in order to bridge the gap between mid Brand and support Brand. It did pretty well at that. Ultimately, though, he has functionally no mana cost now, and so we can walk this back some. We've got some room here, bring down the free passive mana on Brand, and bring down the damage on Emax. Not a huge bunch to say here, but ultimately, yeah, some nerfs to Brand who kind of needs it. Keep in mind, Brand is relatively easy. He's pretty straightforward. There's not that many strong optimizations here, so you should expect to see some level of high win rates because people are higher up the mastery curve just by default than champions like Orianna or Cassiopeia or whatever. And so, yeah, he's going to be above 50% win rate for most players, but that's working as intended, honestly. Not that there can't be some like better gameplay quality on brand, right? Like it might be that we should really be juicing Q and W damage and nerfing spread rate. Like I could totally be convinced that there's like kit level improvements to brand that could be made, but in terms of power, relatively small nerf, but hopefully correct. Gragas, pretty unassailable in top lane, a nerf to his passive healing. Not much to say here. Callista is getting a suite of changes, the point of which are meant to be nerfing her in pro play. She is, so Varus is the highest picked ADC in pro. Callista is the highest presence ADC in pro. She's driven mostly by ban rate. And so the point here is it's direct nerfs, but we're trying as hard as we can to be very directly pro nerfed. So Callista is a champion who I believe is allowed to have below average base AD. Because she has Rend as an attack speed helper and it refunds most of the mana cost, like she has functional on hit damage via Rend, Callista can have low base AD and it's fine, right? Kai'Sa can have low base AD and it's fine. Varus can have low base AD because of his W and it's fine. Like, I don't think Xayah should have low base AD. I don't think, I mean, you could argue Draven could because of his Q, but like, I don't think Lucian should have low base AD because like he's gonna basic attack things in a normal way. Quinn probably shouldn't because the passive is not the same thing here. Akshan is in a weird state because of his double attack, and okay, he's unique. He's not the same kind of ADC, but like, Classic kind of champion where I think low base AD is reasonable, and then there's like normal base AD, which is just like you have normal auto attacks in a lot of cases here, right? You know, you don't have very trivial ways of getting free damage per auto that like doesn't really cost you anything. Like I wouldn't consider like Xayah W as a fair comparison point for low base AD. That's pretty troll. Anyway, what we're doing mostly is nerfing a bunch of things other than this 3 base AD or 2 base AD. Is a bunch of things that we think are really, really pro skewed. So there's two kinds of mastery I want to talk about. One is learning your own champion, of which Callista is actually fairly difficult to learn. But another is actually that your teammates know how your champion works. And even though Callista's Oathsworn tooltip is extremely explicit, the scripting even goes in and says, hey, when you're going to update the tooltip on this buff, like double check all my numbers. What is my W on hit damage? What's going on here? And then give it back to them and then make sure their tooltip, when they look at their champion, says, oh, here is what the W passive does. Like if you play with a Callista on live right now and you hover her tooltip, it will tell you how much damage her on hit damage deals on the W. So that you know that you can play around it. Of course, people don't read, but like it's there. It was like explicitly, like extra care has been given to make this tooltip give a lot of information. And in fact, like I rescripted some of this ability and I created some bugs because it was. Anyway, I fixed them, but yeah, weird stuff. Anyway, I'll also say that there are a lot of optimizations around Callista W. None of these things are in the tooltip right now. They exist on the League Wiki, and literally all of them are wrong. On the unofficial League Wiki. I don't know if there's like a different language wiki that has it correctly, but like none of these are correct. So, okay. Yeah, so W has a minimum damage. Now, W didn't used to do 14% max health damage at rank 1, but so the minimum damage right now, I believe, is 75 to 175. And this minimum damage, by the way, is to any non-champion. If you are not a champion, you're subject to this minimum damage of 75 to 175 based on ability rank. Now that W does 14% max health damage, that's automatically like 43 damage to a first wave caster minion. To me, that is enough to not have to care. So this is going away. The part of the script that handles this has been commented out. The part of the W that like delineates this number has been set to 0. It no longer exists. There's no longer minimum damage against non-champions because even against 300 health caster minion, it's still 40, and that's 40 is fine. I want to be clear that the timing on this is actually on dealing a hit. That like Callista throws an auto attack, someone that her support already marked, the spear has to actually land. Callista attacks something and her support hits it, spear or attack or whatever has to already land. So ultimately, like this doesn't have to have special timing to like handle for basic attacking because it doesn't need to be there. Second mechanic is an execute. If the target has less health than this number, set the minimum damage to this number instead, which means that this would execute for you. This number was, I believe, something like 125 to 225, roughly. It's like roughly 50 more than the minimum. Now, this means that if you are really good at Callista, or your teammate was good at Callista, you could like wear down minions to about 100 health, and your support would be like, I see 125, let's hit the minion for you. And of course, Callista gets the damage, right? It applies for her, it's no problem, but it's like, oh, if your support knew how Callista W worked, they could last hit with 125 damage plus their basic attack. That's really good. That's a lot of wave pressure that I will guarantee you your solo queue support never fucking used. That's a lot of pro power. And by the way, it's not in the tooltip. It's never been in the tooltip. Whoops. Whatever. Who cares? Players don't read anyway. Again, this isn't needed, right? Because the timing is when the attack lands, so it doesn't need to be special, right? If it like applied on launch attack and like you're trying to last hit a minion with 70 health and your spear comes out and it leaves your hand and deals 50 damage and then like the minion dies to a cast minion and their spear lands, that would feel like ass. That would suck. We should make like 2 damage total AD if that was the case. But it's not what's going on here, right? So it doesn't matter. Finally, there is a monster cap for the damage. The wiki is very wrong in this one, and it also wasn't in the tooltip. The monster cap was actually set to double the execute. The monster cap was 250 to 450 based on rank. All these, by the way, are based on rank, not on level. Of course, you max up, you last, and again, level 14, pretty fake on an 80 carry in most games. Of course, not in pro play. But yeah, actually, Callisto W did it. Actually, like literally, the way it looked it up is it just doubled this number in script. So like, you couldn't have like even like done like data scrapes and like scraped her W files, because I don't believe you can data scrape spell scripting. It just doubled this number. So there now is a real monster cap, because monster capping percent health damage is very reasonable. And I set this to something low. So instead of being like 250 to 450 or whatever, it's just like 100 200 based on rank. It's just like, it's intentionally low. It's intentionally your target has under 1,000 health, because I don't care. Because this doesn't need to be strong. It needs to exist. And, you know, 100 damage is plenty. Like, it could be lower, but also like sitting at 60 doesn't matter either. I just like set it just like an arbitrarily low number where it's like, this will feel kind of good and not be a core strength. By the way, Callisto already has Ren. She's already good at killing epic monsters. But hey, she just like won't do an extra 200 damage every 10 seconds when taking Dragon. It'll only be 100 damage every 10 seconds when taking Dragon. Okay, it's a very small amount of power, but like, it's there. And the final change is the nerf to her R cooldown. The tough thing is, oldie cooldowns tend to not affect pro play very strongly, but there aren't a lot of levers for nerfing this ability, because like, what else are you going to do? Like the knockback distance and make it feel like even more ass for support? That's not great. Like the cast range, I didn't want to do right now. Actually, Max's Q cast range is kind of neat. But like, I don't know, that felt kind of janky. It honestly could go down. I could see that. But went for cooldown because, yeah, it turns out Callisto just like saves her support too often, or occasionally her ADC when she's played support. And it's like, yeah, look, it's not gonna matter a lot in solo queue anyway. It's a pro nerf, right? It's just nerfing things that like, they're not the exciting parts of Callisto, but they clearly have some level of power. They're going to affect pro play some, and really the fun part of Callisto is hopping around pressing Q and E. And so try to preserve that to a pretty, you know, decent degree, and hopefully that's the goal. You know, that was the goal. Hopefully that's what happens here. Karthus, just losing some Q damage. Karthus is actually a very steep Master Curve champion. Karthus is actually very hard. And last I checked, Karthus has very, very few mains. Karthus should have Akali level win rates, just straight up. Karthus is actually, I think, probably supposed to be lower than Akali. The fact that Karthus has been remotely close to 50 is like, this champ is like just shattered overpowered. And I know it's like cool to get Karthus in pro once in a while, that's kind of neat, but like this champ is incredibly overtuned. And you know, one tough thing is like, well, players are gonna like just not play him anymore if he's like 48, but like he's just hard. Like, I don't know, the answer is get good in a lot of these cases. I mean, we'll see, right? Like, there's benefit in League of Legends to this champion existing at all, right? If he goes to 0 pick rate, like deleting this champ for the game doesn't make League better. Making him balanced makes him better, right? Like him existing and creating some texture of the game is a positive. But again, I think this champ's supposed to be like 47, 48 when balanced, but he might not get a play rate when balanced, and we might have to make him technically overtuned at like 48.5, 49% win rate in order to like create variance in the game. We'll see. Anyway, it's -3 flat damage on Q. We've used this lever before. We know pretty well what the magnitude is going to be, and it's going to be closer to like 1.7% win rate or something. It's going to affect his early clear. Karthus is the fastest early clear in the game, and it's not close. Like, no one comes remotely close to Karthus' first clear. He can lose a lot here and still have the fastest first clear in the game, so yeah. Kennen loses some base HP. Kennen has actually astronomically low base AD. Like, lower than it's probably supposed to be, but he has 550 attack range, or 575, something around there, I forget exactly. He has enough attack range to really abuse people, and like, he doesn't have to press E to do anything, and so he's ungankable, because if you dive him, he E's backwards, presses Q and then W, and you're stunned, and why did you dive this guy? His kit is so perfect for cutting melee champions in lane. I don't know how to fix that. I'm sorry, I don't. But it's really good for that, right? And melee champions kind of hate playing against him. Unsurprisingly, yeah, Kennen, I think, probably has some kit issues. I don't know how to solve them. Not easily. I'm not saying we're going to solve them anytime soon or at all, but at the very least, he's going to be less self-reliant and a little bit more killable when you go jump on him, which should, you know, do something at least. Yeah, Kennen's just like basically way too high win rate. Skarner, yeah, Skarner has garnered now most of his play rate in top lane. I want to call out that in internal development for Skarner, we did not spend almost any time validating Skarner top lane. We didn't really spend any time validating like what his combat pattern in top looked like, felt like, whatever. We were making a jungler. We acknowledged that players might play him top, and we were fine with it. We're like, yes, we are willing to support Skarner top lane. He is a fairly high damage tank. That's fine. That can exist in top lane. Not worried about it. He's going to fight other melee champions. That seems reasonable. And we didn't spend a lot of time on it. And then he came out, and we saw that like the only successful role he had when he came out was top lane. And so we, did a bunch of changes, and then we made a bunch of changes, and we got to the point where he was bad on top lane and like pretty good in the jungle. And so we made some more changes to like bring those like closer together. And so his like win rates are pretty close together in both top lane and jungle. That said, Skarner is certainly overpowered. He's certainly overpowered. And the primary driver of the feeling of being OP, though I believe he's OP in both roles, the feeling of being OP is driven by top lane right now. It's where his play rate is primarily across the world. It's where his pro play rate is entirely, and this was explicit. Like, I made Skarner a high gold scaling tank to make him not a pro jail jungler. And hey, he is not a pro jail jungler. And I wouldn't say he's even pro jailed. I think he's just overpowered, so him being a top lane is completely normal here. But like, unsurprisingly, you give a top laner a bunch of like gold income incentives, or sorry, a tank a bunch of gold income incentives, and people will naturally take them top lane. But in solo queue, there are income junglers, and like, I mean, like even right now, his like jungle pick rate is like 70% of his top lane pick rate. Like he's clearly still in both roles in solo queue. It's not like he's dead in jungle, but it's like, oh, I was successful in making this champion not a pro jailed tank jungle. Nice. But there's other things to fix, right? Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of work to do on Skarner to clean up some things. I have ideas. It might be as early as 0.14. We'll see. But there are clearly some design issues with Skarner that we should fix, that we will do. I'm happy to do the work. I want this champion to be fun to play. I want him to be fair to play against, all those things. Anyway, I think we can do that. I think it's not going to be a problem. Anyway, the nerfs are mana cost on Q and max health damage on the boulder toss / Q3 auto attack. I think both of these are correct to do. I think right now taking down Skarner's damage is appropriate. I think he's about as tanky as he needs to be. He could be a bit tankier, to be honest. And like, if we were to buff him, I would just give him some armor growth. Or health growth or something, or like rebuff the W shield or whatever. Q mana, even though he builds tier every game, and I'm really happy, I like giving champions mana costs, and I'm happy that like the first like solo laner that I had like release authority over is a champ who needs to buy mana. I'm like very happy about this. Like, I'm happy that like I was able to tune a champion to like require using mana, right? And like require buying mana items. And again, in a role where like there's actually mana items exist. Like fighters have no mana items. I understand that, right? But like tanks have mana items. Like they have Frozen Heart. They have the tier or whatnot. So whatever. Okay, I'm very happy about that. I think we could do a better job in the like mid to long term of like ensuring that our like resource regenerations are appropriate, and that people can actually run out of resources at the appropriate times. And again, it's a whole thing that like at some point in time probably worth doing. Regardless, even though this champ buys tier, he of course spends mana before his first recall, and then even with tier, he can still run out of mana until it's like fully stacked, and he's like all the way up to Fimbulwinter. And so making Q significantly more mana cost from 30 to 50 mana per button press is, I think, pretty appropriate, pretty reasonable. This spell just does more per press than like Jax W, and so it shouldn't cost the same as Jax W. Obviously, making this spell cheap was a really easy like top lane power lever, which is why in 0.11 or whatever, right, I like lowered the Q mana cost, and I made Q do more damage to turrets, because it was like, oh, it's top lane only lever. Like, top lane is worse than jungle. Here we go. And then now it's like, oh, I overshot. My bad. Let's, ultimately, again, there's a lot of gameplay quality stuff that we can fix on Skarner. Totally possible to do here. Anyway, Skarner nerfs. Taliyah. So Taliyah is probably OP as a mid laner and definitely OP as a jungler. Ultimately, to be fair, like a lot of her pro play is coming from mid lane. And so if you wanted to create more pro variants, we probably should go after Taliyah a little bit. That said, though, I don't find that to be as urgent. Like, yeah, she's clearly a pro mainstay. I don't think that's necessarily a huge problem. But yeah, again, she's probably a little bit OP in mid. We're just like not nerfing mid right now. Primarily, Taliyah is clearly massively overperformant in the jungle. By kind of a lot. It's not really close. So what's interesting actually, so I'll quote some Chinese data here. China's low elo Taliyah jungle win rate. So Taliyah is high elo skewed, by the way, right? Pretty strongly. China's low elo Taliyah jungle win rate is higher than the rest of the world's high elo, like jungle Talia win rate. So like Emerald plus rest of world is lower win rate than like plat and lower in China. Like she's 52 in plat and below in China, and then like 53, 54 if you go like higher and higher elo. Also, her ban rate is like extremely high. They're like, this champ is clearly shattered. And you look at win rates and ban rates, like, oh yeah, it's not close. It like very clearly true. So like the urgency is driven by like astronomical Chinese pick and ban rate and win rate data. Karthus, by the way, depending on how you measure ban rate, because there's a lot of ways you can do the denominator. So for example, ban rate dive real quick, right? Should ban rate sum to 200%? Which is like, right, if both teams ban Yasuo every game, should the ban rate be 200%? You could argue that it should be 200% ban rate, even though he's banned in he's banned in X% of all games, and that X would be 100%. So there's ways to calculate ban rate as 100% or calculate it at 200%. You could also calculate ban rate as a function of the number of bans in the game, right? Like if people choose no ban and the champion still gets banned, should that or should that not inflate their ban rate in a way of measuring it, right? It's like when people actually ban this champion, oh, Yasuo makes up 1/4 of all bans. That would be impossible if people didn't actually skip bans. Again, I'm saying that's true, but like that would be another way you could measure ban rate. So one of the ways that you could measure Karthus ban rate by like doing everything the funky way, Karthus has 130% ban rate in China. Or did for a patch, I should say. I think it's going down. But there is a patch where if you picked all of the numbers that you wanted to, the ban rate was 130%. It's like that's clearly not okay. So again, yeah, way too high. And again, like Karthus is like literally also from win rate data, like clearly overpowered. Talia again overpowered, high ban rate, high win rate. Absolutely true here. Final nerf here is to Zac. This is meant to be a top lane skewed nerf. His win rates are like okay-ish. His ban rate's actually not even that high. Obviously, the gameplay quality of playing against Zac kind of sucks. I also think we should reshape many of Zac's strengths. I think Zac's ability to solo kill you is too good right now. At least in mid game. So at some point, if we can get time for a Patrick project to move some things around and keep him appropriately powerful while less lethal, I think it would be a good thing. I think he is more tank than Juggernaut. I think he should be more about setup and less about killing you himself. Unless he builds ability power, I don't mind if AP Zac decides to become a Juggernaut. I think it's reasonable. Anyway, all that to say, there's some pretty simple Zac changes. I also rescripted his healing to care about level scaling and be stored in the passive and not in the R, because R updating his passive based on rank up I think is silly and unneeded. It's just there. I understand it could be there if we needed a reason to make him rank R. He doesn't need that incentive. R clearly has good reasons to rank it up. It doesn't need to be there. And so we can just store it in the passive itself, which makes it actually a little bit easier to develop in the future, because you have to store the tooltip in 2 places, the number in 2 places and whatnot. Now it's only 1 place. Also, the number is just strictly lower. It's a nerf strictly into level 9, and then it treads water a little bit, but it's slightly weaker from level 10 plus. Regardless, it is a strict Zac nerf to his healing. And we have some buffs going on here as well. I mentioned this last time I buffed Gangplank, trying to reintroduce less crit binding, or I guess, take away some crit binding Gangplank. I want to reiterate, I mentioned this last time, that like a different designer 2 years ago did work to get Gangplank out of pro play and make him build crit, and he was successful. And that was like that work achieved the goals successfully, which means it was like effective, high quality work, right? Good job. However, it would be nice if Gangplank was back in pro play. I think that's kind of cool, right? One thing that would be nice is if you actually have more viable, high physical damage top laners, you can once again start playing mages more often and not have to play Tristana, Corki, and Ezreal every game, because you're playing mage junglers all the time, right? And it's like having good, viable, high physical damage top laners means you are allowed to play mage junglers more often or mage mid laners more often and whatnot. And having a variety of strategic expression available is really good, right? Like these are all positive things. And so one way to do that is to unwind the things we did to kick him out of pro play, which was you have to build creative time, to be really squishy, you have to all these things. And so I made him more durable, and I gave him more armor, gave him more health, gave him... and now the E is no longer going to scale based on crit chance. The break even is 40% crit chance for rank 1. That's a gimme. And 80% crit chance for rank 5. Which, to be fair, considering he starts Triforce, that means he has to go to 5 items before E is nerfed. Which is, most games do not go to 5-item Gangplank, even though he prints money. So E is, in functional practice, win rate positive. There are situations in which this ability could technically be weaker in the ultra late game, but in actual practice is a strict buff to Gangplank E, in that fact it's going to be win rate positive. I expect this to be about 1% of win rate. My understanding is Gangplank is meant to be around 48-ish. 48 to 49 is the appropriate Gangplank win rate. He is hard and doesn't have a Yasuo level of mains. So he's supposed to be sub 50. That is the appropriate win rate for Gangplank. But hey, let's play up his ability to play Bruiser. Let's acknowledge that he's got Trinity Force going on in the build. Let's allow him to be a bit more melee and succeed there. And some of that is giving him less crit binding because maybe he'll want to go Death Stance because it's going to fit the champion. I would be okay with that. I think it's totally reasonable for Gangplank, the champion who has an incentive to right-click you in melee range and has a missing health heal on his W, should be able to build tankier items and feel good about them. Graves revert to a previous nerf to his True Grit. He's getting more armor on his E. Great. Lee Sin is doing pretty appropriate amounts of damage. So Lee Sin has an infinite mastery curve. The growth per game is very, very low. Like, if you only checked, like, the first, like, 40 games of Lee Sin, you could be convinced Lee Sin was easy. Because you're like, wait, he gains so little win rate, just like Varus and Misfortune. And then you look at like, okay, but show me like 2,000 games and it goes, oh, it keeps going. He's one of like 12 champions where it goes beyond 1,000 games. It's like, oh, this champ is infinite mastery available. Now the tough thing is, I don't think infinity games is an appropriate inflection point for champion win rate. Like, I don't think it's reasonable, right? So you have to pick somewhere. My rough ballpark is 300. I think that roughly lines up with giving champs win rates that seem intuitive for players and as well as me as a designer. And so I roughly choose 300-ish games of practice as like, if that's the inflection point, it means that like a Yasuo main outperforms a Malzahar main, not like maybe in a 1v1, I think Malzahar wins there, but like in terms of champion power, like eventually making a hard champion lets you overtake without being like, oh, why bother learning Yasuo? It's going to take me 7 years. It's like, okay, like, it's just numbers that feel appropriate, right? And like, this could change over time, but that's how I think right now. Anyway, accounting for 300 games Lee Sin, and maybe you should undercount it because he literally goes to infinity, and so Lee Sin should be at 600 or something instead, because again, he goes to infinity. Lee Sin is not close to his appropriate win rate. Now, what's interesting is that Lee Sin is already the most played jungler in League of Legends. He's the most picked. It's not close. Not really. But, like, he probably should be. Like, if you think about the champion roster in League of Legends right now, and you're like, how appealing is the champion fantasy? How fun are they to play, right? And, like, are they relevant in the sense that, like, are they super niche and only work as a specific bespoke counter or something? But it's like, if you're just like, hey, holistically, how popular would I expect this champion to be? I can't think of a champion who's supposed to be more popular than Lee Sin. This champion is like really, really well designed, really, really great aesthetic, really feels good to play. And even if he's weak, which he currently is, he's still the most popular jungler in League of Legends. And it's like, should we punish him for being popular? Like, should we be like, well, Lee Sin is probably weak right now, but he's the most picked jungler in the game. It's like, yeah, but like, shouldn't he be? And my answer is like, no, I think he should legitimately be the most picked jungler in League of Legends, because who actually is a like better complete package champion than Lee Sin? And I don't think there's anyone. I think he's just the best designed jungler from a I want to play this champion perspective. Just like full stop, I think. So yeah, we should see this. If Lee Sin is ever not the most picked champion in the game, something broke, almost certainly. Like, I'm just like pretty sure that's true. So it's like, well, we probably shouldn't punish this champ for being popular. So yes, he deserves to get some more win rate than he has right now, even though he's already clearly satisfying to play, even while technically weak. And it might be that like, actually, we shouldn't value over and underpoweredness as much as we value variance. And we would like if Lee Sin was only tied for most played champ in the game with Viego, as it turns out. There's an argument. I don't know if I would agree with it, but like, that is an argument that you could make rationally, and that like, I don't think he'd be crazy. Anyway, Lee Sin, I believe, currently does enough damage to do his job, and he's fine in this regard, but Lee Sin could be made more durable. Right? Those are kind of your outputs, right? He's like, does he need more crowd control? He's got probably about the right amount. Does he need more damage? I think he does the right amount. Does he need other weird utility? I don't know where we put it. Like, the reveal stuff can't really get much stronger. There's not a lot of tuning levers there. If you change cooldowns, you're really just changing damage and crowd control. It's not really any different here. I think he could become more durable, and specifically more durable in burst resilience, just kind of straight up. And not in like his ability to sustain and through a minion wave and like just, self-cast W and just punch waves and be uninteractive in mid and top. So, through some concern over what if, mid and top get too good, don't buff the early healing on W. Okay, fine. Early W shield, some health growth. Here you go, Lee Sin. Be a durable guy. Okay, great. Lissandra getting some small buffs. Now, Lissandra, I don't think needs a ton of work in terms of like being powerful enough. I don't think she's very far from her correct win rate. She's moderately difficult and pretty unmained, unpopular. But if we value getting some more variants out there, or like goading play, like there's an argument for like, hey, we should try to make champs like Malphite and Lysandra and Rammus and Galio easy, so that when you see like, oh, here's a game with a bunch of melees to lock down, or a bunch of AD champs to beat, it's like, even if I am a Syndra main, I can pick up Lysandra because it's the right game for it. And like explicitly making counter champions kind of easy. I could see that. I'm not sure it's the right idea, but like it's a line of thought that again I could get behind. Anyway, Lysandra is technically, if she's like a normal champion, roughly balanced already right now, in that like she has a low number of mains and is moderately difficult. She's like a decent number of optimizations. How do you cast R, things like that, right? So I was like, well, we could technically slightly overtune Lysandra, which would be like, oh my gosh, 50% win rate, overpowered, but like would technically be true. And this is like, well, let's just make sure that she's really approachable, or like more approachable for someone who like only has like 12 games on her or whatever, or just like not a ton, but like they've played her in the past. They're master level 4 or something. It's like, well, but you can like, it's the time to pick her, go ahead. And like, I can get behind that. Anyway, viewpoints, right? So it's some AP ratio on Q and some cooldown on W to lock down champions more, have some more kind of laning phase safety. Okay, whatever. Not a lot to say here. Lysandra buffs. Misfortune. Misfortune is one of the easiest, most straightforward champs in the game. Her win is supposed to be like well north of 52%, especially in low elo. It is currently not. So we're buffing up some base AD lane bowling. One thing about Misfortune passive, I mentioned base AD on AD carries earlier. So currently it's 52, and I'm moving it to 55, I believe, or I'm going 55, 58. I think it's 50, 55. Anyway, Misfortune's passive does more than enough to say that if you want to last hit a minion, she is the best at last hitting minions of any champion not named like probably Varus with W ranked, or like a Draven with a spinning X ready. But if you are not only autoing something once, you now have really, really shitty last hitting. And as someone who plays MF once in a while, that feels really bad. Now again, with a love tap, she does deal more damage than other champions, and that's fine. But I would kind of rather be in a world where she can last hit like a normal champion, and then we just like tune love tap on minions to be whatever we need it to be to like not make her abusive again, like in the lane. So that last thing doesn't feel like ass. So I moved her base AD up closer to AD carry normalcy. I didn't go for like big patchwork. Like, what if we changed all the numbers around love tap, whatever? Like we could, but like meh. But it might be worth doing at some point and give her like 59 or 60 base AD and just like mess with love tap against champs and minions early game to make her not like a really abusive early laner. We'll also make love tap like matter, right? Like there's some number in the middle there where it's appropriate, but not happening here. Other change though is Misfortune has his core strength around her bonus boost out of W. There's a bunch of rules that are kind of annoying. Like I'm pretty sure W probably shouldn't get cut off by minions. I believe Teemo W ignores minion damage. I think we should make Misfortune W also ignore minion damage. I'm pretty sure we should just do this. I didn't have time to do it here. There was going to be, it requires some tool updates and whatnot. Just like actually testing this and validating like how much power this is. Didn't have time for that one, right? We chose this change on like Friday afternoon. Right, our patch locked on Tuesday. Like we just didn't have time to validate this. We have a lot of other stuff in flight. Though I think long term, probably correct to make W not get blocked by minions. I think that would be correct for her. Regardless, though, buffed every other lever on W. So the damage lockout, the time between the low value and the high value, both getting buffed by 1 and 2 seconds respectively. So from 10 to 7 seconds for the max value if you don't press W for the active, as well as both the low value move speed and the high value move speed are going up pretty meaningfully so. Low value move speed actually now scales on rank, and so once you have maxed out W at level 13, you actually now, instead of getting 25 move speed, you get 50 move speed when it first turns on, and then that upgrades to 100. That is going to be a lot of extra movement covered, of course. Going to be quite a bit of power. And yes, Misfortune, you are the best AD carry, not named Quinn, at rotating. Have fun, right? Like, here is a core strength. You get this. Go do it. It's you. I think it's reasonable to give her. I think it's cool. I think it's neat. There you go. Orianna, mentioned base stack damage before. Yes, Orianna has an auto attack replacement in her passive. She gets 10 free on-hit damage. Guess what? She still has worse AD than other mages. I've brought this up several times to get buffed before. The difficulty is auto attacks on mages are really, really pro skewed. And so Orianna getting in a pro play with a low solo queue win rate has like always been her problem. The thing with Orianna though is Orianna is one of the harder mages to play in League of Legends. And also, has very few mains. There are not a lot of Orianna one tricks. There's like a decent number of Azir one tricks and LeBlanc one tricks and Akali one tricks and Yasuo one tricks and Noni one tricks. Not many Orianna one tricks. And so she's always going to have a depressed win rate for being hard because she doesn't have that player base bring it up by 0.5, 0.8% or whatever, compared to what you see out of Yasuo, where like he's actually supposed to be like close to 50. Katarina's supposed to be like 50 as well. So that's a weird thing where it's like the observed win rate and her actual power are pretty divorced because of her player base. Regardless, I just kept pushing, and we finally did it. Yeah, it's a pro skewed buff, but Orianna no longer has the worst actual auto attack throughput in the game, basically. Um, Probably she's back in pro, or come close to it. But yeah, I think this is correct for her to have just out of baseline, because if you have a line of text that says, "Hey, you have bonus auto attack damage," if your autos are actually worse, the game is trolling you, and we just shouldn't do that. We just should say, "Yeah, deal with it." Like, we're gonna balance you around this fact. This is true. Pantheon, a very minor thing. Basically, before the Pantheon W change that made it deal percent max health damage, rank 1 W did 60 damage. And occasionally, it would be worth casting to last hit a minion. This is now setting the minimum damage on W from 50, which is what it is live, to that old value of 60, so that it can, once again, last hit minions at 60 health, make it a little bit easier for that. It's a very, very, very small amount of power, but hey, minimum damage to minions going up by 10. Xayah is getting a buff to her E. Old Navori Quick Blades are gone. You no longer get flat ability haste on the item that gives you ability refresh, and you no longer get percent more spell damage based on crit chance, which means that the damage of E and cooldown of E are not so severely sharp anymore. And we don't have to kind of tune around that nearly as strongly. And so alleviating some systemic nerfs that were in when she had the perfect systemic item. She was very clearly a Quick Blades item holder, and it made her E very good, too good, arguably. So we revert to a thing that no longer was true. This happened to Aatrox as well last patch when his ult was nerfed for Gore Drinker, and understandably so. Right? It made sense. The total healing out there, he was like literally full heal, and Gore Drinker's gone. Okay, bring the ult back to what it was, right? Xayah E nerfed because of Quick Blades, back to where it was, right? All pretty reasonable here. So that's the patch rundown. Hope you enjoyed. Patch review, whatever it was. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.